Here is a question that sounds like a joke, but is actually one of the most serious debates in all of archaeology. What if civilization itself, farming, towns, the whole settled world we live in, did not begin because people were hungry? What if it began because people were thirsty for beer? It sounds absurd, but deep in a cave in Israel, archaeologists found the residue of beer brewed 13,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers who had not yet invented farming. And in the deserts of Jordan, they found the charred crumbs of bread baked 14,000 years ago, also before farming began. Which means our ancestors were brewing beer and baking bread before they were farmers. And that strange fact has led some scientists to a genuinely mind-bending idea that the desire to gather, to feast, to drink, and to celebrate together may have been one of the forces that pushed humanity to settle down, plant crops, and build the first foundations of civilization. Today we are going to explore the deep history of the first beer and the first bread, and the astonishing possibility that the party came before the plough. Let us start with the beer, because the discovery is genuinely remarkable. In a place called Rakefet Cave near the coast of modern Israel, archaeologists were studying the remains of an ancient people called the Natufians. The Natufians lived in this region around 13,000 years ago, in the long twilight period between the old hunting and gathering way of life and the new world of farming that was about to be born. They were semi-settled foragers, not yet full farmers, but no longer pure wanderers either. And in the stone mortars they left behind, carved into the bedrock of the cave, scientists found something extraordinary. By analyzing the microscopic residues of starch trapped in the stone, they discovered the chemical fingerprints of brewing, the telltale signs that wheat and barley had been malted, fermented, and turned into beer. This is the oldest known evidence of humans making alcohol anywhere in the world, and it dates to a time before agriculture had truly begun. Now, this was not beer as you know it. Do not picture a cold, golden, fizzy drink in a frosted glass. The Natufian brew would have been thick and cloudy, more like a thin, soupy porridge or gruel than a clear, modern lager, and probably quite low in alcohol. But it was beer nonetheless, deliberately made through the careful multi-step process of turning grain into a fermented drink. And here's the most fascinating detail. Rakefet Cave was not a tavern or a kitchen. It was a burial site, a place where the Natufians laid their dead to rest, sometimes on beds of flowers. The beer, it seems, was brewed for funerals and sacred gatherings before it was ever brewed for ordinary refreshment. The very first alcohol may have been spiritual, a drink for honoring the dead and binding the living together in shared ceremony. And the bread tells a similar story. In northeastern Jordan, at a site once occupied by these same Natufian people, archaeologists found the charred remains of bread, tiny blackened crumbs preserved in an ancient fireplace. When they analyzed these crumbs, they discovered they were the remnants of a kind of flatbread made from wild cereals and other plants ground into flour and baked. And the astonishing thing is the age. This bread was baked around 14,000 years ago, again, before farming. These people were gathering wild grains, grinding them, and baking bread thousands of years before anyone planted the first deliberate field of wheat. The bread came before the farm, just as the beer did. So now we arrive at the great debate, one of the most fascinating arguments in all of prehistory.
For a long time, the standard story of civilization went like this. People invented farming because they needed food. Growing crops gave a reliable food supply, which allowed people to settle down, which led to villages, towns, and eventually cities. Bread, in this story, was the foundation. We farmed to eat, and from eating came everything else. It is a sensible, practical story. Necessity drove progress. People farmed because they were hungry. But the discovery of beer and bread before farming complicates that tidy tale, and it gives rise to a rival idea, sometimes playfully called the beer before bread hypothesis. The argument goes like this. What if the first reason people started intensively gathering and eventually cultivating wild grains was not simply to make daily bread for survival, but at least partly to make beer for feasts? Think about what a great feast meant to these ancient people, bringing the community together, cementing social bonds, displaying generosity, honoring the dead, marking important moments. These gatherings were enormously important socially and spiritually, and a feast is so much better with a special drink to share. If communities wanted to hold large, impressive ritual feasts complete with beer, they would have needed a lot of grain, more than they could easily gather by chance. And that need, some researchers suggest, might have been one of the pressures that pushed people toward deliberately growing grain, toward farming itself. In this view, the desire to feast and to drink together was not a luxury that came after civilization. It may have been one of the sparks that helped ignite it. This idea connects to one of the most spectacular sites in the ancient world, a place called Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey. There, around 11,500 years ago, before farming was fully established, people built enormous stone monuments, massive carved pillars arranged in great rings, requiring huge amounts of cooperative labor. And at Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have found evidence that points toward large-scale feasting, including possible traces of brewing in great stone vessels. The picture that emerges is striking. People may have been gathering in large numbers for communal feasts and ceremonies, building monuments and sharing food and drink before they had settled into farming villages. The feast, the gathering, the shared ritual may have come first, and the farming that could supply such gatherings may have followed. People were building places to celebrate together before they were building permanent homes to live in. Now, it is important to be honest and balanced, because this is a genuine scientific debate, not a settled fact, and good scientists disagree about it. The beer before bread hypothesis is provocative and fascinating, but it remains controversial. Many researchers think the truth is more complicated, that the shift to farming was driven by many factors working together. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age, population pressures, the availability of wild grains, and yes, perhaps, the social pull of feasting too. It is probably not a simple case of either bread or beer being the single cause. The honest position is that the origins of farming were complex, and that the discovery of early beer and bread has added a rich and surprising new ingredient to the conversation. The realization that food and drink were never only about survival, they were also about community, ritual, celebration, and meaning. And that, in the end, is the deepest lesson here, and it is a beautiful one. We often imagine our ancient ancestors as grimly focused on survival, thinking of nothing but their next meal, locked in a desperate daily struggle just to stay alive. But the first beer and the first bread tell us something different and far more human. These people did not just eat to live, they feasted. They gathered, they honored their dead with special drinks and shared meals. They went to enormous effort, grinding grain and brewing beer and building monuments, not merely to fill their stomachs, but to come together, to celebrate, to mark what mattered, to be a community. The impulse to share a meal and a drink with the people we care about, to gather and feast and mark the important moments of life, is not a modern indulgence. It is ancient, woven into us from the very dawn of settled human life. So, the next time you raise a glass with friends, or break bread at a shared table, or gather with the people you love to mark a wedding, a funeral, a celebration, remember that you are taking part in one of the oldest and most human traditions of all. 13,000 years ago, in a cave that was also a graveyard, our ancestors brewed a thick, cloudy beer to honor their dead and bring the living together. 14,000 years ago, they baked bread from wild grain before they had ever planted a field. They feasted before they farmed. And it might just be that this deep human love of gathering, of sharing food and drink, of coming together to celebrate and to grieve, was one of the quiet forces that built the world we live in today. The party, it turns out, may have come before the plough, and in a way, we have been feasting together ever since.